Welcome new and old friends. I am 242 and tonight I have 2 stories of creepy encounters for you. The first one is about why you shouldn't leave your front door open at night. And the second is why maybe you shouldn't follow that chanting in the middle of the night. So make sure you're safe before I tell you these chilling tales of creepy encounters of people or things you don't want to run into. Someone pushed me out my own window in my own house while my daughter was sleeping upstairs. So this happened a couple of years ago. We used to live in a house in the mountains. The only neighbor we had wasn't that close from our house, so there literally was no one around. This happened on a Sunday. I had my daughter, she was 13, coming for the weekend and she was sleeping upstairs. My bedroom is downstairs. I was in the living room watching TV when I decided to go outside to contemplate the stars. The thing is that I have to leave my door semi-open because there's only one handle logically inside the house, and the other side of the door can only be opened with a key, so no handle from the outside. I contemplated the stars for about 5 minutes. Then I felt like I could smell a weird smell. I went back inside. It was about 3 a.m., so I decided to go to sleep. I woke up at 6 a.m. and I could see the sunrise, so I decided to open my window since it was extremely hot inside, and stand up at the edge of the window from outside. Suddenly I felt a hand push me in my back. I got pushed from my window by someone. Thing is, there's only me and my daughter in my house. And I just got pushed out of my own house by a stranger, and my daughter was still inside. Since the window was closed and I couldn't open the front door either because I didn't have the key, I knew my neighbor was a locksmith, so I subsequently rushed to his house, woke him up at 6 a.m., and explained the situation. He took his stuff and came with me to my house. Now, I'll tell you what my daughter told me. She told me that she could hear an old man coughing, and she didn't recognize the cough, so she instantly went into the bathroom and locked the door. The door to her bedroom didn't have a lock, only the bathroom did. And she turned on the tap while she was calling the police. My neighbor managed to open the door, and we rushed upstairs. Whilst going upstairs, I saw that a knife was missing from my knife block in the kitchen. We went upstairs and we saw that the door to my daughter's room was open. We turned on the light and saw an old man with a hood holding that knife, waiting in front of the bathroom door. My neighbor and I beat the ever-living snot out of this man and then waited for the cops to come. The man got arrested, and a week after that, we moved into another country. Satanist in the storm tunnel. This was back in 2014. I was a 20-year-old community college student living with my parents in Southern California. I had a tight-knit group of stoner friends. There was 5 of us all together, myself included. We're all still best friends today. Like all bored suburban kids, our days hanging out usually consisted of loitering in the parking lots, getting stoned, and going to parties when we could. We had a few smoke spots around town we would go to and get high at. Our main spot was a place we called the Sewer Lair. It was a giant storm tunnel at the end of the trail in a canyon area behind one of the local neighborhoods. It was secluded and we could be there as long as we wanted since there was no houses nearby. The tunnel was maybe 20 feet in diameter. A small stream of water ran down the center of it. There was an offshoot directly to the right just past the entrance that led to another small tunnel system. This is where we would hang out. We would come here almost every night. One night we're in the sewer lair. It's maybe around 1 a.m. We would usually hang out pretty late and wait for our parents to go to sleep, so we don't come home and have to see them while we smell of weed and cigarettes. Me and the boys were smoking, talking, and listening to music. The usual, except this night the water was draining from one of the tunnel systems further down. It was pretty loud. It sounded like a small waterfall. This happened a few times before, so we don't think anything of it. We don't get much rain in California, so it made sense that this would only happen once in a while. A few hours in, one of the guys kept looking over at the main tunnel, saying he thinks he hears voices. We tell him it's just the music and our voices echoing, but we turn off the music and listen silently to prove that he's just stoned and being paranoid. We listen closely, and we could hear these faint voices. It was difficult to hear because of the waterfall, but it sounded like a group of people chanting. We froze and traded glances. We sat in silence and listened for a few minutes. One of the bros finally snapped and insisted we go check it out. A few of the bros were scared and didn't want to do it, but after some bickering, we decided to go and see what was happening. There was 5 of us. What could go wrong? So we used the flashlights on our phones and make our way down the main tunnel. We walked for about 15 minutes and the chanting got louder, but it still sounded very far away. We couldn't make out what they were saying because the waterfall was so loud, but it was definitely a group of people speaking in unison. We walked for a while longer. At this point, we made it so far that there wasn't even graffiti on the walls or trash on the ground anymore. As we continued walking, we noticed that the tunnel was getting warmer. It was always really cold here, so it was strange that the temperature was gradually rising the further we went. We kept moving. The chanting was getting louder, so we knew we were getting close. It was loud enough to realize that the chanting was in a different language, and that it had been at least 4 or 5 people. We kept moving, and noticed the graffiti on the walls started to show up again. It was different than before though. It was all very eerie. I immediately brushed it off as some edgy kids trying to scare people, but the further we walked, the more unsettling the marks on the walls became. It was a lot of weird occult type stuff. There were melted black candles scattered on the ground with these weird trinkets around them. The trinkets looked handmade and were made of animal bone, string, and cloth. We were all quietly inspecting the area when one of the guys pointed down the tunnel and told us to cut the lights. We turned off our flashlights and looked. We could see a faint flickering orange light far down the tunnel. It was barely visible because it was so far, but we could tell that the light was coming from either a candle or torches by the way it was flickering. It wasn't a direct light either, so it had to be coming from an offshoot in the tunnel. Our phones were all low on battery, so we started speed walking towards the orange light. The chanting continued. Then, out of nowhere, a blood-curdling scream bellowed from the tunnel up ahead. We all froze and put our lights down. It was one of the most horrifying screams I've ever heard in my life. I couldn't even tell if it was a human or an animal. The chanting continued, then another horrifying scream echoed down the tunnel. The guys were ready to get the F out, but I insisted we had checked it out. I led the way as we slowly walked towards the light. The chanting and screaming continued. We made it about 30 feet from the offshoot that the light and voices were coming from. The tunnel was hot at this point, and it smelled awful. The air was thick and it was difficult to breathe. We were sweating and it felt like we were suffocating. We inched our way toward the offshoot as the chanting continued. flinching every time there was another awful scream. The screams had becoming increasingly more violent and non-human sounding. We were all lined up with our backs against the wall of the main tunnel in front of the offshoot. The chanting and screaming were coming from right around the corner. The boys gestured at me to take a peek. I took some deep breaths. My heart was pounding. I quickly peeked in for a second, then pulled back. This offshoot was exactly like the one at the entrance we would hang out at. At the center was a naked man, on his knees, with his hands on the ground and his back to me. He was covered in dirt and sweat. He was in front of what looked like a handcrafted altar. The walls were covered in writing. The whole area had crowds of black candles lighting the walls, and they were all lit. There had to be at least 50 or 60 of them. The man was also sitting at the center of some kind of candle formation. My face went numb. I looked at the guy and couldn't even speak. The chanting and the screaming continued, but it just gave them a blank stare. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. The chanting and screaming sounded like it had been a total of at least 5 people, but there was only one guy in there. I decided to take another peek mid-chant. This time, my whole body went numb. All of the chanting and all of the screaming was coming from this one man. It was like he had 5 voices at once. I gestured to one of the bros next to me to take a look. He stepped forward and his foot brushed against the ground, making a loud scraping sound that echoed. We all froze. Then the chanting completely stopped. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was dead silent. We all looked at each other. Then out of nowhere, we made a sprint for the entrance, all at once. None of us even said a word. We just ran as fast as we could. It felt like we were running forever. We hurled our butts for about 10 minutes before we finally gained out of the storm tunnel. We stood in the field in front of the sewer lair and caught our breath. A couple of the guys were throwing up from the sprint. After we caught our breath, I told them everything I saw. They were all speechless, trying to comprehend what just happened. We started to hear screaming from the tunnel. This time they were long and drawn out, almost like a howling dog. We ran up the trail to the neighborhood and got the F out of there. We vowed to never come back again. This was about 6 years ago, and it still haunts me and my bros today. I have no explanation for what happened. I don't know much about Satanism or occult type of stuff. But if anyone does, feel free to give me your thoughts on what you think was happening that night. We would really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. With that, my friends, we're at the end of the stories for tonight. I hope you enjoyed them, and if you did, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe to my channel. If you would like some bonus content, there is a link in the description for my Patreon. I hope you have a good evening, and I will see you on Thursday with my stories of day. Good night.